Lily never thought that a simple day at the park would be the last memory she had before crossing into eternity. At just 10 years old, she was full of life, laughter, and innocence, but fate had a different plan. One moment she was playing, and the next, everything went dark. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the world she knew. She was in a place far beyond human understanding. What she saw changed everything. Jesus stood before her, his eyes filled with both love and urgency. He had a message, a warning, and he was sending her back to deliver it. It was a bright summer afternoon, the kind that children dream about. Lily had spent the day playing with her friends at the park, running barefoot in the grass, her laughter echoing through the air. She felt free, her heart light with the joy of childhood. Her mother sat on a nearby bench, watching her with a warm smile, knowing her daughter was safe. But in a single instant, everything changed. One moment she was reaching for her friend's hand, and the next, she felt something sharp inside her chest. A deep, unbearable pain struck her, and her world began to blur. Her breath caught, her knees buckled, and before she could call out, she collapsed onto the ground. The voices around her became muffled, distant, as if she was sinking into deep water. Her mother's screams were the last thing she heard before everything went silent. The pain vanished, replaced by an overwhelming peace. She felt light, as if she were floating, no longer bound by the heaviness of her body. For a brief moment, she thought she was dreaming. But as she turned and looked down, she saw something that froze her in place, her own body lying still on the ground, surrounded by panicked voices and flashing lights. Lily wanted to call out, to tell them she was still there, but no one could hear her. No one could see her. A strange force began pulling her upward, a gentle but undeniable tug. She looked around in panic, trying to understand what was happening, but then she saw something even more terrifying. A tunnel of radiant light appeared before her, stretching into infinity, and she was being drawn into it. She wanted to fight it, to stay with her family, but she had no control. The light grew brighter, and then, in an instant, she was gone. Lily had expected darkness, emptiness, or maybe even nothing at all. But instead, she found herself standing in a place so beautiful, so radiant, that her human mind struggled to comprehend it. The air around her shimmered, filled with golden hues that seemed to move and breathe. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, yet not like anything from earth. It was soft and warm, as if it were alive. The sky above was not like the sky she knew. It pulsed with light, shifting in colors she had never seen before. This was not a dream. This was real. She had stepped into a world beyond anything she had ever imagined. She felt no fear, no sadness. There was an overwhelming sense of love surrounding her, wrapping around her like the arms of someone she had always known but never met. In the distance, she could hear a soft melody, not like any music from earth, but something deeper, something that resonated inside her soul. She took a step forward, her feet barely touching the ground, and the moment she moved, she felt something inside her shift. She was no longer just a child. She understood things that she never could have understood before. As she looked around, she saw figures moving in the distance, glowing with a soft, pure light. They were not ordinary people. They radiated warmth, kindness, and something she could only describe as holiness. She wanted to run to them, to ask where she was. But before she could take another step, everything around her changed. The golden hues faded, and a powerful presence appeared before her, so strong, so full of authority that she could do nothing but fall to her knees. She knew, without anyone telling her, that she was standing in the presence of Jesus. Lily could not move, could barely think. The moment she saw him, she felt every part of her soul tremble, not with fear, but with awe. Jesus was unlike anything she had ever imagined. His presence radiated power, yet his eyes were filled with a love so deep that it overwhelmed her. He did not need to speak for her to understand. His very being communicated truth in a way that words could never express. She felt small, insignificant, yet completely known and loved at the same time. He reached out his hand, lifting her to her feet with a gentleness that filled her with warmth. His touch was unlike any other. It was as if every wound, every worry, every moment of doubt she had ever felt melted away. There was nothing hidden from him. He knew everything about her, yet there was no judgment in his eyes, only love. He smiled, but there was also something else in his expression, an urgency, a sorrow mixed with his kindness. "You have been brought here for a reason," he finally spoke. His voice was not loud, yet it carried through her like thunder, shaking every part of her being. "You must see what is coming, and then you must go back." Lily's heart sank. She didn't want to go back. She wanted to stay in this place where there was no pain, no fear. But before she could protest, Jesus lifted his hand, and the world around her shifted once again. Suddenly, Lily was no longer in the peaceful realm of light. Instead, she found herself hovering above the earth, looking down upon the world below. But something was wrong, very wrong. The world was not as she remembered it. The sky was dark, the air heavy with something she couldn't quite explain. She saw people moving, but their faces were filled with fear, confusion, and emptiness. She turned to Jesus, her heart pounding. "What is happening?" she asked. He did not answer right away. Instead, he stretched out his hand, and suddenly, she saw visions unfolding before her. Images of people turning away from faith, of families breaking apart, of truth being twisted into lies. She saw churches that once stood as beacons of light now growing dim, their doors empty, their voices silent. Tears filled her eyes as she saw leaders making decisions that led people further from God, not closer. There was division everywhere, families torn apart, friendships destroyed, people turning against each other over things that once seemed unimportant. She saw people distracted by things that did not matter, while the things that truly mattered were being forgotten. The world was asleep, unaware that time was running out. Jesus spoke again, his voice filled with sadness. "They do not see. They do not listen. But I am still calling them." Lily turned to him, her chest tightening. She understood now. This was why she had been brought here. She had to warn them. She had to make them see. Lily's eyes widened as she saw a vision of America unfold before her. At first, it looked beautiful, vast cities, golden fields stretching for miles, a land filled with opportunity and promise. But as she looked closer, she saw something deeply troubling beneath the surface. The heart of the nation was wounded. People walked through the streets, but their eyes were distant, their faces heavy with burdens. There was division everywhere. Neighbors no longer trusted each other. Families sat together but did not speak, and even churches were split over things that did not matter. She saw leaders, those in powerful positions, standing on great stages, making speeches filled with promises. But something was missing. There was no sincerity in their words, no true concern for the people. Many of them spoke of peace, but their actions brought division. Some tried to unite the nation, but the weight of distrust was too great. She saw people arguing, not about faith or righteousness, but about temporary things, money, power, and personal gain. Truth was no longer truth. Lies were no longer lies. Everything was blurred. Jesus turned to her, his expression both sorrowful and hopeful. "This nation was built on my name, but many have forgotten me. They call upon me only in times of trouble, but they do not seek me daily." Lily could feel the pain in his voice. America, a nation blessed beyond measure, was standing at a crossroads. It could turn back to God, or it could continue down a path that led to destruction. But then Lily saw hope. She saw small groups of people, praying, gathering, standing firm in faith despite the chaos around them. These were the ones keeping the light alive. She saw churches filled with people who refused to compromise, who chose faith over fear. She saw young children, just like her, standing up and speaking boldly about Jesus. The nation was not lost. There were still those who remembered. Jesus spoke again, his voice filled with love. It is not too late, but the people must choose. They must choose to stand for truth, to love one another, to turn back to me before the time is gone. Lily felt a deep urgency in her heart. She now understood. America was not beyond saving, but the people had to wake up, and fast. Lily was then shown the President of the United States. She did not see his name or face clearly, only his heart. He stood in a grand hall, surrounded by advisors, each whispering different things into his ears. Some voices were filled with wisdom, guiding him toward truth, but others were deceptive, their words coated in false promises. He looked burdened, confused, unsure of what path to take. She saw the weight he carried, not just the weight of politics, but the responsibility of leading a nation in a time of great spiritual conflict. His decisions would not only shape policies, but also determine the direction of the nation's soul. Jesus told her, "No leader can save a country. Only the hearts of the people can bring true change." Lily realized then that while a president holds power, the true power lies in the faith of the people. Then she saw something chilling. Whispers of deception growing louder. Many leaders were being influenced by things unseen, forces working behind the scenes to lead the country further from truth. It was not about politics, not about parties. It was a battle of light versus darkness, and many did not even realize they were being used. Yet, there was still hope. Lily saw that some leaders were praying in secret, asking God for wisdom. She saw that God was still calling men and women in positions of power to stand for righteousness. But the battle was fierce, and without the support of a praying nation, they would struggle. The president, no matter who he was, could not restore the country alone. It had to be the people, choosing truth, standing for faith, and rejecting the deception that was spreading. Jesus spoke again, "If my people pray, if they seek me and turn from wickedness, I will heal their land." The word sent shivers through Lily's soul. She had to tell them. She had to tell everyone. Prayer was more powerful than policies. The real battle was not being fought in political offices. It was being fought in the hearts of the people. Lily's vision expanded beyond America. She saw the entire world covered in a thick fog, dark, swirling, yet invisible to those who walked in it. This was not physical darkness, but spiritual blindness. People were being led astray, but they did not even know it. The enemy's greatest trick was not forcing people into darkness, but convincing them they were already in the light. She saw false teachers rising, men and women who spoke in the name of God, but preached things that were far from Him. Some focused only on wealth, others only on self-love, and many twisted the word of God to fit their own desires. People flocked to these voices because they made them feel comfortable, not realizing they were being led away from truth. Jesus whispered to her, "The greatest danger is not the storm outside. It is the storm inside, the one that keeps people from seeing me." Lily saw people glued to their screens, watching news that was filled with fear, consuming entertainment that numbed their spirits, following influencers who led them away from righteousness. They did not even realize how lost they were. But then she saw pockets of light. People gathering in secret, studying the Bible, praying, worshiping in spirit and truth. They were not deceived because their eyes were fixed on Jesus. She realized that the only way to escape the deception was to stay close to God. His voice had to be louder than the world's. Jesus spoke one last time. "Tell them to wake up. Time is shorter than they think, but I am still calling them." As Lily watched the vision unfold, she saw something that made her heart swell with hope. Children were rising up. Young boys and girls, just like her, were standing boldly for Jesus, unafraid of what others thought. They were speaking truth when adults stayed silent. They were leading prayer groups, preaching in playgrounds, bringing their friends to faith. She saw schools where revival was breaking out, not because of teachers, but because of students. She saw children laying hands on the sick, worshiping in their bedrooms, standing for righteousness even when the world mocked them. Jesus smiled as he watched them. The children will lead. They will not be afraid. Lily understood now. She was not just a child. She had a mission. Jesus was calling her, and others like her, to speak, to stand, to share the truth before it was too late. Lily's vision shifted again, and she found herself standing above the earth. She saw time unfolding before her like the pages of a book turning rapidly. Jesus raised his hand, and suddenly, she saw signs appearing across the world, clear warnings that his return was near. First, she saw natural disasters increasing in strength and frequency. Storms unlike any before, earthquakes shaking places that had never felt them, fires consuming lands, and waters rising where they never should have. People called it climate change, science, or chance, but they did not see that it was a warning, a cry for humanity to wake up. Next, she saw wars and conflicts spreading across nations. Some were fought with weapons, but most were battles of deception, division, and fear. People turned against each other over differences that once seemed small. Even families became divided, arguing over beliefs, politics, and values. Then she saw a great spiritual awakening happening alongside the darkness. While many were falling into deception, others were coming to Jesus like never before. She saw stadiums filled with worshipers, underground churches expanding, and even people in the most restricted nations secretly crying out to God. Jesus turned to Lily and said, "The signs are not coming. They are already here." But then his voice softened, "But my people still have time. If they wake up, if they listen, they will be ready." Lily's vision changed once more, and she found herself standing inside a small home, watching a family gathered in prayer. The parents held their children's hands, heads bowed, their voices soft yet strong. There was no fear in them, even though the world outside was in chaos. They had built their home on the foundation of faith, and nothing could shake them. She looked outside and saw another home, one without prayer, without faith. The family inside was overwhelmed by fear, glued to the news, arguing over what was happening in the world. They had no peace, no hope. The difference was clear. One family stood in the light, the other was drowning in darkness. Jesus placed his hand on Lily's shoulder and said, "Prayer is the greatest weapon my people have, but many do not use it. If families would pray together, the enemy would have no power over them." She saw how in homes where prayer was constant, there was a supernatural shield protecting them from fear, from deception, from destruction. She then saw entire communities gathering in prayer, churches coming back to life, schools where students led worship. It was a revival, but it was not happening in big arenas or through famous preachers. It was happening in the quiet, humble places where people simply sought God. Jesus looked at her with deep love and said, "A home that prays together will stand. A nation that prays together will be restored." Lily then saw Jesus standing at the doorway of many hearts, knocking. Some people opened the door and let him in, welcoming his presence, finding peace in his love. Others ignored him, too busy, too distracted, too comfortable in their own way of life. And then, there were those who heard the knocking but refused to open the door, rejecting him completely. She understood now. Jesus was calling out to the world, but not everyone was listening. He was still reaching for them, still giving them time to turn back, but the time was running short. She saw people who had once believed but had drifted away. They had been hurt, disillusioned, or simply distracted by life. But suddenly, they started to feel a stirring in their hearts, a pull toward God again. Some resisted, thinking it was just emotion. Others embraced it, falling to their knees in repentance, realizing that they had been lost, but were now found. Jesus said, "It is not too late, but they must choose. I will not force myself into their lives. They must open the door. Lily understood that this was the warning she had to bring back. People had to turn back to God now. Not tomorrow, not someday, but today. Lily then saw something terrifying yet incredible, a great battle unfolding, but it was not fought with swords or guns. It was a spiritual war, invisible to most people, yet affecting every single life on earth. On one side, she saw armies of angels, clothed in light, standing strong, ready for battle. They were guarding homes, churches, and individuals who had placed their trust in God. They moved with power and purpose, fighting off the darkness with truth, love, and divine authority. On the other side, she saw forces of darkness, deceptive and manipulative. They did not fight openly. They whispered lies, planted seeds of doubt, spread division and fear. They convinced people that God was not real, that faith was foolish, that evil was good and good was evil. She saw how every decision people made, whether to follow truth or believe a lie, determined which side they stood on. Some unknowingly helped the darkness spread, while others, through simple acts of faith and obedience, strengthened the forces of light. Jesus looked at her and said, "The battle is already happening, but those who stand with me will never be defeated." Lily turned to Jesus, her heart pounding. She knew what was coming, knew that she had to return. She didn't want to leave his presence, didn't want to go back to a broken world. But Jesus knelt in front of her, looking deep into her soul. "You must go back. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that I am coming soon." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. And in an instant, she felt herself being pulled back. The light faded, her body felt heavy, and suddenly, she gasped for air, her mother's tearful face hovering above her. Lily screamed, "Jesus is real. He's coming. We have to be ready." Lily sat up in her hospital bed, her heart racing. Tears streamed down her face, and her hands trembled as she realized she was back in the world she had left. She had just been in the presence of Jesus, had just seen the final battle, had just heard his urgent words. Now, everything felt different, louder, heavier, and more urgent than before. She looked at her mother, who was crying, holding her close, whispering prayers of gratitude. But Lily knew she wasn't back just for them. She had been sent back for a reason. She had a message to deliver. Her parents tried to calm her, telling her she had experienced something extraordinary. But Lily shook her head. "No, you don't understand. It's real. Jesus is coming soon. People need to wake up." The urgency inside her was almost unbearable, like a fire burning in her chest. She could still hear his voice echoing in her soul, telling her to go, to speak, to warn. But doubt crept in. Would people believe her? She was just a child. Would they listen? She had seen the deception in her vision, how people ignored the truth, how they refused to believe. The thought of people rejecting her filled her with sadness, but she knew she had to try. No matter what, she had to speak. Her parents sat with her, listening to every word she shared. At first, they were confused, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was saying. But then, her father's face grew serious. "I believe you, Lily," he whispered. "I felt something changing too." Her mother nodded, tears in her eyes. They knew their daughter was telling the truth. Lily couldn't stay silent. Every moment felt like a countdown. Every second felt like time slipping away. The more she spoke, the more she realized that Jesus hadn't just sent her back to tell her family. He had sent her back for the world. At school, she started talking to her friends about Jesus. Some laughed, some listened, some felt something stir inside them, but didn't understand why. She didn't care about the laughter. She only cared about the ones who were willing to hear. She told them about what she had seen, about the battle, about the deception, about the choice people had to make before it was too late. Her church invited her to share her story, and as she stood in front of the congregation, her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of her mission. "Jesus sent me back to tell you. Wake up. The time is short. The battle is real. But he loves you, and he's waiting for you. People sat in stunned silence, some weeping, some feeling something they hadn't felt in years. The news of her near-death experience spread. People in other churches, other states, and even other countries wanted to hear what she had seen. Her small voice, once just the voice of a 10-year-old girl, was now carrying a message from heaven. But not everyone welcomed her words. Some called her crazy. Some accused her of making it up. But Jesus had warned her. Many would not listen. Many would choose blindness. Still, she kept going, because even if only one person believed, it would be worth it.